Okay, we're back from the break, and I was on my tirade about the Walgreens pharmacy again, but basically I didn't release that information, and this pharmacist did not fill that prescription for that patient, and pretty much told the patient that she was in charge of that, and she was all of that in the pharmacy, and that because I didn't cooperate with her, she wasn't going to fill that prescription. And I think that's a shame. I think at the end of the day, it is really none of the pharmacist's business what your medical record says. If you want to relay that information to the pharmacist, you're free to do that. But I'm not going to. I'm not going to be bullied by a pharmacy chain that believes that they somehow have the authority. Because when they're getting into that, they're crossing, in my mind, an imaginary line in the sand for therapeutics. They don't know how to interpret that information, and even if they did, they wouldn't know what the proper therapeutics are involved in that situation. They have the ability to dispense, okay? They cannot prescribe. That's not within their scope of practice. And in order to know what to prescribe, you need to know your patient. You need to know a lot more information than what is just in the chart. And if they think for a moment that I'm just handing out pills to people because I think it's just like I want to do that, here, whatever you want. You want, 1,000 oxycodone, you want Percocet, you want this, and what do they think? That doctors run a smorgasbord? Yeah, there are a few bad doctors out there that do that, but for the most part, that is not the case. And I'm really offended by pharmacists who want to challenge, my authority in the office on what I'm doing with my patients. So we're going to take this call. Chuck.
Hi, Doc. It's Chuck.
How you doing?
Had a couple things that are kind of related. There was a report today about pharmaceutical giants caught supplying cartels with tons of bulk ingredients to produce meth. And,
what was that?
Of course, anybody with any brains knows this has been going on. And they talk about how meth is very similar to Adderall, and the same system that supplies Adderall can easily supply meth, unless they're detected. And another thing, I don't know if you're aware, I worked for NSA for 22 years when I was in the military. So I'm kind of not an expert, but I kind of know a little bit on what's been going on as far as law enforcement and drugs. Mm-hmm. And it's not a whole lot other than corruption. And I do think times are changing one way or the other. And I said last week, either we're going to be slaves or we're going to be free people for the first time. And that justice, whatever that is, may end up being a reality. But anyway, another article today was that NSA's files are going to be available to law enforcement for normal crimes and that, mm-hmm. which I think everybody in the country kind of suspected was the road they're going down. But I just find it interesting between all this stuff going on, the pharmacies cutting people off that really need the stuff.
Yep.
And then you got this, to me, the real abuse I see is with the kids, with the Adderall and the Ritalin, overdiagnosis of ADHD, which, is based to me on simply a kid being a kid. Mm-hmm. It has real no foundation. I don't care if they call themselves doctors or not. And what's happening, of course, is a hell of a lot of our kids are hooked on drugs. And there's a pipeline that is going to be very difficult to break. Mm-hmm. And I don't have the right answer on how you break it or whatever. But anyway, I'll drop that in your court, and I'll hang up and hear what you have to say. Thank you.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, that's interesting, Chuck. You certainly have a lot of insight to, collecting of information and storing it and releasing it to people, on a need-to-know basis, and who knows what that need-to-know basis is. And I think over time, as we've seen what they've done to the Constitution and the laws and things of that nature, so they'll probably shred that for the interest in so-called the greater good. And I think society is very complex, and it's very confusing, and yeah, you can go down the rabbit hole for a lot of conspiracy theories and a lot of things, and it may not be as complex as we would think it is, but I think it's a pendulum, and I think this, with regards to this opioid thing, it's a pendulum that, and I don't think I've ever heard of a pharmacy being fined, a chain being fined that much money, and I think our government has basically tried to find ways to, capture more money and more revenue because it can't control its own spending and handouts, and I think that probably has part of it. So maybe we'll pick this up in a minute, but we have Linda on the phone. Linda.
Yes.
Thank you for calling.
I have a question.
Uh-huh.
I have been on oxycodone for approximately 2.5 months now.
Okay.
I have shoulder replacement, and I've got a lot of damage up there, and they have to do a bunch of other stuff. I had a bad fall here about a week and a half ago, 2 weeks ago, and I had to ask my doctor for another prescription because I knew because of the fall I would need more medication, which I did. I ran out. I've been without pills now since, it's been over a week now, and I have to wait till Friday to go get any more. My insurance refused to refill the new prescription the doctor wrote for me because they wanted $80. How? I ran out. I need it. I'm in pain. I'm not, and I'm an old lady. I'm over 70. What good? Answer me if you can on the TV, okay?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, and that is a shame, Linda, and that's part of the problem that exists today, which is, and unfortunately, you've been using these medications you've built up a dependency on them to relieve a certain amount of pain. That there's a big difference between being dependent and being addicted. You're not out breaking the law. You're not lying to your doctors about your ailments and that you need, and you're not, forging prescriptions. I mean, that's the difference between a dependency and addiction. Are you breaking the law? Are you lying? Or you have a negative consequence that you're doing to get your medication? And so what ends up happening is that now this problem, I understand, is not so prevalent in maybe Las Vegas. So I don't know if there's a conspiracy here in Pahrump between the pharmacy chains. I do know that the 2 small private pharmacies that sprung up here were bought out by Walgreens. So the story about maybe they weren't doing something right or they were doing this, Walgreens just buys out your competition. I mean, any company, and they're a big chain. I mean, they paid $9 billion for Rite Aid cash, $9 billion. So this is it's a monster. So the $80 million the fine that the feds levied against them was like $8 to you and I, maybe. It really was just a slap on the hand, but this is what's happened as a result of that. And it's affected poor people like Linda who may need a short-term increase in their pain medication because of additional injury. Now, I can say that you have somatic pain, Linda. I mean, you have shoulder pain, and now you have an injury. So opioids aren't necessarily the best pain medication for that illness. Non-steroidals may be, which as long as you can take them, and I don't know your overall condition. But they're forcing people to go weeks without medication, to go through withdrawals. And that can be a very dangerous situation for a lot of people. And my best advice to anybody on opioids and anybody who's on them for chronic pain is you have to consider this as a part of your therapeutic options today, meaning you should be trying to cut back on these medications, not because you have to go through pain. It's because you're up against the immovable force, meaning you're up against the pharmacies who don't want to order based on the needs of the people at the time. They just want to order X amount of medication so they stay below the radar, and this is unfortunate. I don't know if it's something against the DEA to put pressure on them, but what they did was right, meaning 300% increase, you've got to make some allotments for that. You have to know your customer. And that's a lot of the things that they weren't able to do. They didn't know their customer. And this means that, and knowing your customer is just knowing the fact that they do live in the community, they've seen a physician who's licensed in the community, and if there's some concern about the numbers of medications I mean, 3 years ago, I heard a story where somebody walked in and filled 300 oxycodone 30, 300 pills. No questions were asked. That person later got in trouble for selling half of them. But point being is, I mean, I know that whoever prescribed that didn't get a call questioning what they were doing. No, they just filled it left, filled it right, did whatever they needed to do. I don't think that's right either. I think there has to be a middle ground. But I think making people suffer as a result of someone, some corporate draconian policy not to put enough medication on their shelves, and they won't even tell patients whether they have anything. They're afraid they're going to, break down the pharmacy door and steal things. I mean, there's more insider theft inside pharmacies than there is people doing things of that nature. So anyway, we're going to take a break here, and we're going to come back. We'll talk on this subject and anything else you care to bring up. Again, thanks for tuning in.